KSQD, Santa Cruz. It is Talk of the Bay, and there are a lot of great journalism projects that have sprung up trying to mend the gap between the shrinking size of our local press, the print media, and the big gap in information that we're getting about local issues. Jumping into that fray is Voices of Monterey Bay, a online project of many journalists who were once part of the print media and bring their expertise. And here with us is Claudia Melendez. Hi, Claudia. Thank you
Good
for
afternoon,
joining.
Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm so happy to hear you. So congratulations. You all have been in business almost as long as K-Squid, haven't you, in Voices of Monterey Bay?
Yes, we launched in the fall of 2017, and we're here, kind of like going strong or hobbling, whichever you want to call. But yeah, here we are.
I know it's not an easy thing to invent a new form of journalism that involves grants and other forms of income other than advertising. Tell me about the mission of Voices of Monterey Bay and how it's different from what you were doing when you were writing for the Monterey Herald.
Well, two things. One, we really want to focus on covering stories that are being overlooked or are not being explored as in depth as we think they should be covered. And so we have a lot of investigative journalism. We're very proud to have Royal Calkins, who was a former executive editor for the Herald, driving our investigative journalism. He has won awards because of that. He has continuously exposed what's happening at the Monterey County jail. There's been so many deaths there that it's just hard to count. There's one of the highest death counts that there are in California, in a jail in California. And Royal has been at the forefront of those investigations. And but also we want to tell stories differently. Our co-founder Julie Reynolds started doing a podcast. She's doing an award-winning podcast as well. It's called Gray Area. Gray Area tries to look at stories that are not so simple. They're more complicated, more nuanced. Last year, she did her podcast dedicated solely, the whole podcast, which was 10 episodes, to a man who spent 20 years in prison, and then he came out, and how was that transition? She started following him, talking to him in prison, and then followed him as he left. And then one of the really neat things about this project is that Gilbert Bayo, that's the name of the gentleman who spent 20 years in prison, was a co-producer of this show. So we're also trying to incorporate the voices of people who have been people who we talk about mostly, but making them part of the story, empowering them to tell their own story as well. So that's one of the driving forces behind Voices. Somebody calls me up and says, write about me. I go, why don't you write your story? And that we try to do that.
That is such a different approach. So often we have official voices telling about people who are disenfranchised, who don't get to talk about their own lives. And that's really different than what daily print media does, which is often move from story to story every single day because they don't really have time to do the in-depth thing that you just talked about. 10 episodes of a podcast. That's something.
Yeah, indeed it is. And that's kind of like the intention. We're trying to, I don't know if you've heard about, there's a movement called the slow news movement to try not to be going after the breaking news or after the car chase or after the, police report. This is more like, let's try to understand what the world is about. Let's try to understand our community. Let's try to understand the issues and how they affect us. And that is really the mantra behind Voices. Let's take our time with these stories to really understand, to really do a good job of reflecting what's happening. Another thing, too, for me that is very special and very particular, and I'm very dedicated to, is that, as an immigrant, Spanish-speaking Latina, I feel and I know, because people have complained often about the coverage that Latinos get in the news, and that is not what Voices does. We are very specific, very careful, and very committed to having a diversity that is genuine, that really reflects what's going on in a very positive way, in a very genuine way. So I'm very proud of that part of Voices. And we do try to recruit people who speak Spanish, who want to write in Spanish. We are bilingual. We haven't been, we try to translate, but we also try to write stories in Spanish as well as in English as much as possible. When I write stories personally, I'm bilingual, so I write them in both languages. So that's another ththing we have going
That's
for us.
really important. I wonder if you covered the Pajaro Valley flooding last year, because that's right on the northern part of Monterey County. I know there was a lot of international and national coverage as well as local coverage of that story, but it kind of is ongoing. So I'm wondering if that's one of the ones you watched.
We did do some coverage of it. One of the stories that we were really proud of having done, one of our co-founders, she wrote a very thoughtful piece about the levees and whether that's a really smart way of trying to control the floods, because basically, she said something that had been voiced by other people who were thinking about this, which is like, this is nature. How do you control nature, right? And there's some studies that are talking about how it's probably easier to just leave wide spaces of land where the water can run for certain periods of time, and then or do some different channeling, right? That is not just trying to block the water from not going. As we know, earthquakes will happen, floods will happen, but how can we do this in a way that is more effective, less damaging? So that was a very beautiful piece. We also had Olga, a woman who is one of our correspondents. She doesn't live in Pájaro anymore, but she is from there, and she was on the ground interviewing people, asking tough questions. So we didn't do a lot of it, but what we did was very thorough and very thoughtful of the community.
What do you think the outcome was of covering so in depth the problems at the Monterey County Jail? Do you feel like the pressure maybe from opening that up to the public and talking about it in public in your journalism space had an effect of actually doing something about the problems there?
One thing that we noticed that happened was that it was being ignored largely by other media, and after so many stories that had been happening, the other news outlets started picking up the story. So that was one thing. I also think that what was important is that the courts were aware that we were watching, and I think that when there's that kind of pressure, that kind of visibility, it really does have an impact. Unfortunately, the people who go to jail, prison, they tend to be who stay there, right? Because one thing is to go, and if you have good lawyers, if you have means so you don't stay in jail, then you're probably a person who are very poor, and your voice is probably going to be not heard. The people who have been dying at the jail are people who have mental health challenges, are people who are poor, somewhat disenfranchised. And can you imagine any more disenfranchisement than just allowing you to die in jail? And if you read those cases, Rachel, they are really, really, the way they have it. It looks as if this is a thing that was done on purpose. People who are supposed to be watched and they're not. People who are not supposed to be allowed to have water or have certain elements so they cannot commit suicide. They are, and it becomes almost like they're allowed to die like this, and it's just really horrible thing to let someone happen. And having us focus a lens on that is telling them, we're watching you, you can't be doing this to people. I think it does have an impact.
We got a letter from the local Santa Cruz County Jail from some people there who were on a hunger strike, and the list of things that they were mentioning were similarly horrifying. frankly, and they don't have much representation or voice. So having journalists, these are areas that are really hard to get access to as well because of various rules that don't apply to other places. How did you get access to the inside of the Monterey County Jail?
Well, we were very lucky that there's actually been activism, right? There is a lawsuit that was pending. Actually, Monterey County Jail is under a settlement that they need to change the way they do things because they've been so horrible in the past that they need to change. And specifically, there's a company, for-profit companies called WellPath, that has been contracted by Monterey County to provide health care for the inmates. And they have been doing such a bad job that they were placed under scrutiny by the courts. And so our investigative reporter got access to those reports, and he's been doing his reporting based on those reports. However, WellPath had been redacting all of these documents, right? And we, along with some activist groups, the family members of the people who've died, have been suing and demanding that these documents are redacted and be shown to the public the way they are. And that's been one of the successes, right? That the courts agreed with the plaintiffs, with the family members, and said you cannot be redacting these. But definitely the pressure that that Voices has been putting on these people, the pressure of that Royal Calkins, the journalist, has been putting on this topic, it has made a difference for sure.
And I'm looking here at WellPath and the fact that they are the largest for-profit healthcare provider for prisoners. You can't even joke about it being a captive audience, but there's no way, for people in prison to advocate and say, hey, I'm not getting good health care, because they have kind of a monopoly, it looks like, on so many different jails around the country. But they've been sued more than 1,300 times. It's really...
They have a really horrible record, absolutely. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. And what is it going to take to break their monopoly? I don't know. But I guess always shining a light on things like that is the first step for sure.
It is so essential. And I don't know that everyone understands the process of journalism and how careful journalists are. When I talk to my students, I don't really think they have a clear picture of what it takes to do an investigative piece. And I was wondering how you fund that kind of work, because it does take a lot of time.
Well, right now we're very, very lucky that Royal Calkins, who is our star investigative journalist, is retired. So we pay him not very much, but he's very passionate about this. He has been an investigative journalist all of his life. He strongly believes in keeping powerful organizations accountable. And that's really what's driving this at this moment, because it is a very expensive endeavor. We fundraise for him and for other writers. We are mostly right now surviving of grants and our subscribers, our donors, right? So people who at the end of the year, we have a drive that starts in November. It's November, December. We ask people, please fund us, please support good journalism. And people have been very generous. We get donations that range from 10, 15, 20, 100, some 1,000. And that's pretty much how we've been able to do these. We are also partially volunteers, actually mostly volunteers. I have a day job, and so does Julie Reynolds, my other co-founder. So right now continues to be a labor of love, a labor of passion, a labor of believing that journalism is essential for democracy, and that it's important to keep the powerful accountable. So that's why we keep doing it.
Well, you are fellow travelers in the media world in the same way we are, in that we are mostly volunteer-run and operated, and we believe that we need to keep the lines of communication open and keep people informed. we don't have a news department, but we do have these talk shows every night that try to do in-depth interviews, and we would welcome even more partnership, with journalists like you. So we should continue to talk about how we can bring some of your content onto K-Squid and anything we can do to shine a light on what you're doing. It's so, so important that we know what's going on. And so often it feels like national news sort of swipes off the table our local concerns, but it's the local issues that affect us personally that we have to live with, right? The decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I think that that's been happening with the, like what they call it, the death of news, right? Is the ones that are surviving right now are the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times. The LA Times did a great job covering the Pajaro River, right?
Yeah.
But after that Pajaro River, they disappeared, which, they have other things other catastrophes or other emergencies they have to cover. But I mean, we do have local budget concerns. We have, it does feel that as if, we disappear. We don't have any sort of media reflecting our concerns, right? So yeah, most definitely. I think that's something that we definitely need to have more local coverage of issues that affect us on a daily basis and that the national media is not doing. And that local media, I know that there's some local media, right? So you have the Lookout in Santa Cruz and, there's the Herald, still tries, still doing stuff. They're not doing a lot like they used to. When I was at the Herald, first started there were 14 reporters. Right now, I think they have 4 or 5.
Oh, that is really the math in all these local. The Sentinel used to have a beat reporter for education, for city council, for every different aspect of our town and county. And now I think it's, down to a very small handful.
Right.
So what you're doing becomes even more important. And I'd like to give out the website. It's voicesofmontereybay.org, and people can support and subscribe and read the content there, whether it's in Spanish or English. And in the time we have left, which is only about 5 more minutes, Claudia, I wanted to just sort of have you highlight, if you would, some of the top stories that you've been covering in the past, just couple of months, and something maybe that's on the horizon that you're really looking forward to covering in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Well, one thing that we covered last year, I did a big project about pesticides. And pesticides is kind of those topics that for me are very important because they affect mostly the people who grow our food. And the people who grow our food are exposed very regularly to pesticides, which are very dangerous and toxic chemicals that affect their health and the health of their families. And I did a big project in conjunction with Palabra, which is the magazine of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and with Environmental Health News. That was a huge project that got an award recently, and I'm very proud of have worked on that. And I hope your readers check it out and read it and learn more about pesticides and the rules that we have in California that are not completely protecting our farm workers. And so that's one thing that I worked on last year. And another thing that we do at Voices that I'm very proud of is training the next generation of journalists. And so in the next couple months, we are part of the California Youth Media Network, which encourages young people to write stories about their own communities. And so we are preparing for the next round, and I'm going to be working on that with young people. And then we're going to take them to the statewide conference in May. So those are the 2 big projects that I'm going to be working on. Julie's preparing for the next season of Gray Area. And so those are like the big projects that we have on the horizon. And we're very excited about that.
Yes. And if they do anything in the audio realm, like if they have some really great interview that they did as part of their research or preparation, if it's well recorded and, it's something that could be used, edited, we'd be happy to air it here on Talk of the Bay. So we should talk about bringing some of those voices forward. We are all about that, and we're available to spread them now that we're reaching Monterey County with 89.7 FM and 89.5. We reach pretty much Salinas, Monterey, Carmel, the whole southern part of the Monterey Bay now. So we would love to have those voices amplified on our station. And
Excellent.
It sounds like you're going to be quite busy. Anything that you'd like our listeners to know about how to get in touch or the title of that pesticide story? I think that they would be able to find it on the website if they knew what to look for.
Yeah, I guess just looking for the word pesticides, or the actual name of the series is Adrift. And very easy to find. I also like to do arts coverage, so they can also look for my arts coverage. I don't know. I'm just very excited. I thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope you listeners visit our website, read us, contribute. I think contributions request is at the top of the page, and just send us a letter of support. We are labor of love, but we're high quality journalism. We're your neighbors. You can trust us, because if you find something that is inaccurate, you can come find us and we'll retract it.
That's right. You can go talk to you next door.
Yeah, exactly. But you won't find that, because we try to be, like you say, we're very thorough. We're very demanding of ourselves and our product, and we take pride on it.
Well, I'm so happy for your readers and watchers, or whatever you call the people who subscribe and support you and read you, are really getting the best of the best. People who have won awards all over the place, and they're choosing to do this with their time. So Claudia Melendez Salinas, one of the great award-winning journalists of our region, stepping it up with Voices of Monterey Bay. Thank you for being a guest. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate what you're doing, because you're also, out there fighting the good fight and keeping the voices alive on radio. I appreciate that.
All right. You have a good evening. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. This is Talk of the Bay on K-Squid, KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQT Prunedale, 89.7, 89.5, and 90.7 FM, all over the Monterey Bay, and streaming live at ksqd.org. Coming up next, it's Ryan Althouse with The Kooky Side of Crazy. But first, we have First Person Singular. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. It's been my great pleasure to host this program.